All right. As I said yesterday, it's been a momentous week, political week, probably, and the impacts of both domestic and international events will carry on for some time yet. It's like throwing a rather large stone in a pond and watching those concentric ripples spread outwards. But obviously in New Zealand, the Treaty Principles Bill and its introduction to Parliament, signalled in the coalition agreement and in policy that the ACT Party took to the election at the last election, was introduced into the bill. There are a few protesters there, actually quite a desultory few, it has to be said, in comparison with other protests that have been at Parliament over the times. But there were a group of Māori leaders, including our next guest, iwi leader Helmut Modlik, and 6 other senior members of Ngāti Toa, who I think are the local iwi, or one of the local iwi of the Wellington area, who walked out of the public gallery at Parliament in protest at the introduction of the controversial Treaty Principles Bill. Joining us to talk about that and also what their concerns are is Helmut Modlik himself, and he joins us now. Helmut, lovely to have on the show. Good morning to you.
Kia ora, Michael, and to your listeners.
Listen, mate, I assumed you went there to make the protest, right? Because I couldn't imagine anything worse than going to Parliament and sitting in the press gallery, but you did, yeah?
Yeah, look, you're not wrong about the worst bit. I mean, I had to endure an hour of what passes as question time where not a single question was answered. So that was an interesting contradiction in terms. But look, no, I went there with my relations to really make the point that this is a momentous, a range of reasons, momentous time, and the introduction of that bill being coming into the process rather earlier than was previously advised. It didn't seem right for that to pass without us being there, and at least marking that with our presence, given its constitutional importance.
Okay. I am a Pākehā New Zealander, as you're probably aware. I've got a little bit of Moriori in me, but that's all. And we've been here, I think I'm in my 7th generation now. No. Yes, that's right, 7th generation. I'm interested, I am a bit of a history nut and did my degree in that at university and postgraduate as well. So I'm sort of interested in, and so therefore I'm aware of the historical setting of the Treaty of Waitangi. I got an A in public law at Victoria University, in which I got an A+ in the Treaty of Waitangi. You'd be interested to know, Helmut. And so I'm aware of that. But I'm aware that when the Treaty of Waitangi was given legislation by, in actual fact, the Kirk government way back in 1975, or Kirk Rowling government, and then set up the Waitangi Tribunal, but gave legislative sanction to the Treaty of Waitangi itself for the first time ever in 1975. The concept of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi were, we didn't know what they meant. We just read the Treaty of Waitangi, the English version, the Maori version, and off we went. It wasn't until the courts came, as you know, Helmut, in the late 1980s, started to interpret what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi are after they had been inserted into government legislation by the Longi Palmer administration, that we started this particular journey as to what those principles actually mean. And subsequent to that, as you know, Helmut, the courts and public sector servants largely have interpreted, and it has evolved over the last 50-odd years. Now, question. Isn't Parliament the right place to determine what those principles are, given that Parliament is representative of all New Zealand and there is a democratic relationship between the elected members and all adult New Zealanders?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. You missed out the most important part of the story, which is the beginning. The Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which of course was a verbal agreement because the signatories didn't read, was made with the chiefs of this land, who Lord Normanby and his government in 1849 had acknowledged in his letter to Hobson as been recognised by both the Queen at that time and the Queen's government as having individually and collectively sovereignty, was his words, over their respective tribal lands. And that Hobson was to seek, insofar as he could obtain, such a degree of sovereignty or rights of governance over those lands as much as he could obtain. Now, it is, as you'll know, as a A+ historian, a historical fact that he did get 500-odd signatories, primarily on the Maori version, but a number of chiefs, including some of the largest, most powerful Tainui, Waikato Tainui being probably most notable, who didn't sign. And so the beginning of the story is that, in fact, a verbal agreement was entered into, constitutional in nature and intent, which variously gave rights to the British Empire. The question being, what rights were they? Now, the key article, as you will know, in question is Article 1, which speaks to the ceding of kawanatanga, which is a transliteration of the word governor, kawana, and governance. But the key question is governance over whom? And that is really the heart and crux of the matter from day one. Now, to the British, subsequently, not at the time, which all the evidence confirms, what the British sought and obtained, well, what they obtained was the right to apply their laws to the British citizens then in these lands and those that would come. In the second article, what was acknowledged was that the absolute chieftainship of the chiefs who were the signatories was retained and acknowledged by the British Empire. And that chieftainship extended to not only their rights of self-determination, but control over their lands, their people, and their treasures. Now, that was the fact of the matter. And so we had the beginning of the establishment of a civil society of sorts, rules-based civil society, and that was the intent. Now, we fast forward, and of course, again, you'll know, but for those of you listeners who don't, with the likes of the Wakefields, and subsequently George Grey and others, under pressure from the local settlers, and with the eventual acquiescence of the British government back in London, there were a number of breaches in principle and in fact of all of those treaty articles. And I didn't get to Article 3, but we'll leave that there. Of course, that culminated, and Ngāti Toa Maiiwi was a party to this key legal and constitutional turning point in 1877, when one of our chiefs, Wiparata Te Kākākura, took to the courts, which ended up in the highest court of the land, where Justice James Prendergast declared that the Treaty of Waitangi was a simple nullity, not because of any logical flaw in its formation or the process of its signing, but because the signatories on the Maori side were, quote, savages. And so it was, for the next 100 years, it disappeared from...
Yeah, no, sorry, Helmut, we know all this. Listen, the history's fine. That's not what we're talking about. Helmut, we're not talking about the history.
Let me wrap it, and I'll come to your question directly. The reason I've restated all of that, to be frank, is because you know it, but most New Zealanders don't. And so it was because of a breach of the constitutional basis for the British being here that all that law and constitutional foundation disappeared. And so
there was no law. And this is where you're mistaken.
No,
there was no law. The treaty was never law, and it was not part of the constitutional arrangements of this country. So you are mistaken in saying such.
Can you explain that then, please?
Sure.